90-day pause in tariffs approaches its halfway mark, we take stock of what the Philippines has done so far to ensure we get the best deal out of the negotiations happening with the U.S. Trade Department. But how are we doing so far? Going by Trump's schedule, the 90-day pause ends on July 31st. Let's check back in with Stephen Olson, former U.S. trade negotiator and now visiting senior fellow at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute, Singapore, live from Hong Kong. Good to see you again, Stephen. Welcome back to the program.
Always good to see you, Kathy. Good morning.
Right, so the last time we talked was March 4th, well before the April 2 Liberation Day tariffs. And 2 months on, with a 90-day pause in between, and we're crossing over that halfway mark this Saturday, how are you assessing how the world's reacted?
Well, a couple of things. I don't think we have any greater clarity on where this process is going to ultimately end up at the halfway point than we did at the beginning. Other than to say that, from my perspective at least, I think it's clear that President Trump has begun to realize that he's overplayed his hand a little bit. First, he announced these draconian tariffs, then he pressed the pause button, and more recently at the negotiations with China in Geneva, the U.S. was able to provide a very substantial tariff reduction to China in exchange for nothing, really, nothing more than a commitment to continue the discussions. So I think there's a bit of a realization creeping in that he's perhaps overestimated the strength of the U.S. Position and underestimated the strength, certainly of the larger trade partners like China. So in terms of the rest of the world, I think they've taken note of that and perhaps feel a bit of a swing in the leverage in these discussions.
Right, overplaying his hand and an overestimation, as you say, it's all showing up in the long-dated treasuries. That punched 5% following Moody's U.S. credit ratings downgrade. So what has Trump underestimated more? Is it the markets or the strength of America's trade partners?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, President Trump committed a cardinal sin of any negotiation, which is to reveal to your negotiating partners where your pain point is. So very early on, when the treasuries took a dive and that resulted in the tariff pause, that was certainly noted in every capital around the world that was something that really got the president's attention. But in terms of the U.S. position, Trump has an oversimplified view of the world. He says other countries export more to us than we export to them. So slap tariffs in place, and these countries will line up hat in hand, willing to offer me concessions. But that's not quite right. I mean, the United States is a large country. It is an important country, but it is not the only country in the world. And countries, particularly China, have been diversifying their trade relationships away from the United States. So it might come as a surprise to President Trump to learn that China now exports more to ASEAN than it does to the United States. So the leverage dynamic isn't quite what Trump thought.
A very important sub-region. If there is one realization how this is playing out, it's really that globalization has pretty much diversified many countries away from just one big trading partner as the U.S. So how evident is that, Stephen? And what gains are sub-regions like the ASEAN are having now, given our proximity to China and the geographic closeness with each other as neighbors?
Well, I think it provides a very strong impetus for the region to even further deepen integration and further remove restrictions and barriers to the extent that that's possible. At least initially, I think it's almost a given that relations with China will grow even more closer. But there's a word of caution there, because as the U.S. market is progressively close to China, a lot of that industrial excess capacity that's being generated in China is going to increasingly end up in ASEAN, and that's going to result in increased antagonisms between China and various countries in ASEAN. And you've started to see that already.
As a final point, as former U.S. trade negotiator, how best can the Philippines get the most out of the current negotiations with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative?
It's going to be an uphill climb. I think what you need to do is remind the United States of the ways in which the United States benefits from healthy, collaborative, productive trade relationships with the Philippines. I think that's probably the best approach.
Got that. Well, thank you so much for the update. Stephen Olson, former U.S. trade negotiator and visiting senior fellow at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute, Singapore.